Clara Johnson moved through the polished halls of the Ellington residence with quiet confidence. She had worn her crisp uniform every day for more than 10 years, and each crease in her apron spoke of her commitment. In the mornings, she dusted. The shelves where leather-bound books stood in perfect order. She arranged fresh flowers in crystal vases so that their soft pink and white petals caught the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Everything in Marcus Ellington's home reflected his careful taste. Yet no amount of silver polish or floral arrangement compared to the care Clara took in understanding the man she served. From the very first day, Clara sensed there was more to Mr. Ellington than the expensive suits and wide smile. He welcomed her kindness with gratitude. When she offered an extra cup of tea on a rainy afternoon, he thanked her as though the gesture warmed more than just his hands. Over the years, Clara watched Marcus support countless causes. She saw him slip envelopes of checks to school teachers in need, heard whispers of his private donations to neighborhood food banks, and knew of the silent work he did to keep local businesses afloat when hard times struck. He never spoke of these acts loudly, did not need to. Clara understood that true generosity often grew in the shadows, hidden from public eyes. Clara learned almost everything she needed to know by listening. She listened to the hushed phone calls in Marcus's study, where his voice held steady. Even under pressure, she listened to the careful footsteps late at night as he paced, pondering new ways to invest in community projects. Once, she found him sitting alone in the dim light of his private library, eyes closed and hands folded. She paused at the doorway, waiting quietly until he opened his eyes and offered a small, tired smile. Without words, she brought him warm soup and fresh bread. He accepted the meal, and Clara knew she had done more than bring food. She had offered comfort. She also observed the signs of something more serious behind Marcus's composed exterior. A few weeks ago, she heard him on the phone, voice low and strained, speaking about a legal matter that threatened to undo everything he had built. When she entered the kitchen later, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes had deepened. He stirred his coffee without looking at it, fingers trembling just enough for Clara to hear. She asked softly if he wanted sugar, shook his head, as though surprised at the offer, and muttered a quick thank you. Though he never shared details, Clara sensed his worry. She made a silent promise to herself. She would stand by him, no matter what came. Each morning, Clara prepared Marcus's breakfast just the way he liked it: scrambled eggs with a hint of chives, whole wheat toast, lightly buttered, and a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. She placed the tray before him with a respectful bow. He often said, "You have a gift, Clara." She always smiled and said she only tried to do her best. But Clara felt a quiet pride. In her hands, simple breakfasts became small moments of peace before his busy day began. That peace was precious to Marcus, and she knew it. In her own life, Clara found satisfaction in routine and service. She lived modestly in a small apartment across town with potted plants that bloomed under her careful attention. Her work with Marcus gave her a sense of purpose she carried with gentle pride. The day before the trial, Clara noticed Marcus's suit jacket hanging untouched in his bedroom. In the past, he would have prepared every detail meticulously. Yet that evening, when she offered to press the jacket, he shook his head and said he would do it himself. Clara watched him fumble with the iron's temperature dial and gently took control of the task. As she smoothed out the fabric, she offered words of encouragement, simple phrases like, "It will be all right, and you have faced challenges before." Marcus stared at the jacket as though he saw more than just fabric. He took a deep breath and finally said, "I hope you are." "Right, Clara." On the morning of the trial, Marcus stood at the foot of the grand staircase, waiting for Clara to bring his briefcase. She handed it to him, fastening the clasp with careful fingers. He paused, looking down at her, and said, "You have been my rock for many years. Thank you." Clara felt her heart skip, but she simply nodded and replied, "I only want to help." "Sir?" In that moment, Clara realized she cared for Marcus more deeply than any employer-employee relationship. She respected him not for his wealth, but for his kindness and quiet determination to make the world a better place. As Marcus left for court, Clara continued her morning tasks. She tidied the living room, replaced flowers that had wilted overnight, and readied lunch in the kitchen. But her mind kept drifting to the courthouse. She imagined Marcus standing alone in that grand, echoing room, facing stern judges and silent jurors. She worried that the lawyer he had hired might not be enough to protect him. Clara's heart. She believed in the truth. They had all the evidence they needed to clear his name. She thought of every piece of paper she had carefully filed, every conversation she had overheard, and every moment she had witnessed him working late into the night. That knowledge made Clara feel a quiet surge of confidence. She would do whatever she could to help. By midday, Clara found herself unable to continue normal work. She laid aside her cleaning cloth and stepped to the drawing room window, looking out onto the bustling street below. She thought of Marcus, standing before people who did not know his heart. She thought of the documents stacked in his study, unseen by the world, that held the truth. In that moment, Clara made a decision she never expected to make. She would defend him. She would speak up, share what she knew, and do everything in her power to protect the man who had shown her such trust. Clara's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was steady. She would not let him stand alone. When the final chime of the grandfather clock rang, Clara gathered her courage. She smoothed her uniform, adjusted her apron, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Though she had never defended anyone in a court of law, she believed in the strength of truth and the power of loyalty. She set out, leaving the safe familiarity of the Ellington home, and made her way to the courthouse. In her mind, she repeated a promise: she would stand by Marcus Ellington no matter what. Because defending him was not just her duty, it was her choice. And choice, she thought, was the greatest form of loyalty of all. Marcus Ellington stepped into the marble halls of the courthouse just as the morning sun shone on the tall pillars. He adjusted the lapels of his navy blue suit and smoothed his tie, though his hands trembled ever so slightly. Felt colder than the spring air outside, and he could hear footsteps echoing down the long corridor. Reporters and photographers clustered near the entrance, their cameras clicking like a swarm of restless insects. Marcus kept his head high and his shoulders straight. He reminded himself that truth was on his side. He walked past the press room and into the private waiting area reserved for those on trial. His hired lawyer, Edward Dale, sat at a polished wooden table, reviewing papers and glancing at his watch. Edward was known for his courtroom skill and silver tongue, and Marcus had believed that with him by his side, all would be well. But today, Edward's face looked strained. His usual calm smile was gone, replaced by a tight line at the corners of his mouth. Edward glanced up as Marcus approached. "Good morning," he said, though his voice lacked warmth. He handed Marcus a thick folder of documents. "I've gone over everything again," he said, "but I need you to know this case is far tougher than we expected." Marcus studied the folder. Inside were financial records, emails, and contracts that Marcus believed would prove his innocence. Yet Edward's eyes told a different story. They were tired, worried. Marcus swallowed. "Do you think we'll win?" he asked quietly. Edward hesitated, tapping a pen on the table. "We have holes," he admitted. "The prosecution's evidence is strong in parts, and their witnesses seem credible. I've done my best, but I'm not sure we can sway the judge or jury." Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He wanted to argue, to reassure Edward, but the lawyer's doubt shook him. Edward folded his arms. "Honestly," he said, "I might have to step away from this. I can't risk my own career on such a shaky case." Marcus's heart sank. "Step away?" he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Edward gave a slow nod. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I've done what I can. I have to withdraw my representation." Marcus felt the world tilt and swirl around him. He imagined falling, but somehow stayed on his feet. He looked at Edward, searching his face for any sign of a mistake, but saw only finality. "But the trial starts in minutes," Marcus said, voice cracking. Edward checked his watch again. "I know," he said softly. "I've already filed the paperwork. We'll have to proceed alone unless you find another lawyer quickly." He closed the folder and stood. "Good luck." Then he turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. Marcus stood alone in the empty hallway, the sound of Edward's retreat growing faint. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his breathing. He pictured the courtroom doors ahead and wondered how he could face the judge without any legal support. He thought of Clara Johnson, his maid, and how she had always given him small comforts, a warm cup of tea, a gentle word, but she was not a lawyer. He swallowed back, rising panic. A court officer opened the heavy wooden doors and motioned for Marcus to enter. The guard's expression was neutral, but Marcus felt exposed, like prey stepping into a lion's den. He crossed the threshold and took a seat at the defendant's table. Round him, the room buzzed with hushed voices. The judge's bench stood high at the front, flanked by flags and the national seal. To his left sat the prosecution team, papers neatly stacked, faces impassive. Behind him, and across the aisle, chairs were filled with observers and journalists, each waiting for the drama to unfold. When the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. The judge, an imposing figure in black robes, called the court to order. Marcus rose and bowed his head respectfully. Then the judge spoke, outlining the charges and reminding Marcus of his right to counsel. Marcus murmured that he understood. He glanced toward where Edward should have been, but there was only an empty space. He felt his stomach twist. The prosecution began its opening statement. The lead prosecutor spoke with clear confidence, painting Marcus as a careless millionaire who had used his wealth to dodge rules and silence critics. Witnesses were ready to testify that Marcus had falsified documents and misused company funds. The words fell over Marcus like icy rain. He held his breath, praying that Edward's arguments would suddenly appear, that someone would rise to defend him. But the silence at the defense table remained unbroken. Midway through the morning session, the judge called for a brief recess. Marcus stood, legs unsteady, and tried to speak to Edward's absence. He leaned toward a nearby court clerk. "Where is my lawyer?" whispered urgently. The clerk shook her head. "I don't know," she said softly. But he filed the withdrawal. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned to see Edward slipping out of the courtroom, briefcase in hand, blending into the crowd. Marcus watched him go, each step a blow to Marcus's confidence. When the recess ended, the courtroom doors opened once more. Marcus rose to remain standing until addressed, but no one looked at him. The judge waited, then nodded to the prosecution to continue its questioning. One by one, witnesses took the stand. They spoke with clear, rehearsed voices, repeating the allegations in detail. Each time, Marcus wanted to speak up, to shout the truth, but the judge's gavel kept him silent. He watched as the evidence mounted against him, feeling powerless. By late morning, the prosecution called its final witness. The witness presented an email that appeared to show Marcus approving questionable transactions. Marcus stared at the screen where the email's text was projected. He knew the email was a forgery. He remembered the real message he had sent, and he had saved it in his personal files. But without a lawyer, he could not raise an objection. The judge allowed the email as evidence, and Marcus felt tears of frustration welling in his eyes. The judge paused. "Is there any response from the defense?" he asked. The room fell silent. Marcus searched the defense table, but it was empty. His throat went dry. He felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Fear and shame washed over him. He had to say something, but he did not know what to do. He looked toward the back of the room where Clara might be, praying she could help him somehow. But he saw only rows of chairs and the wooden door beyond. At that moment, Marcus felt alone in the world. His longtime lawyer had abandoned him, leaving him to face the judge and jury unprepared. He felt the weight of his fortune and reputation slipping away, and he wondered if his years of good deeds would count for nothing. He thought of the faces of schoolchildren he had helped, of struggling business owners he had supported. He thought of Clara's faithful service, of the small kindnesses she had shown him. He vowed silently that he would not give up hope. The judge called for another recess, and the courtroom emptied once more. Marcus sat in his chair, head bowed, clutching the edge of the table. He closed his eyes and imagined someone standing. Beside him, someone brave enough to speak the truth. He thought of Clara Johnson and her gentle strength. He had no idea how she could help, but he believed she cared for him. He gathered his papers and rose, determined not to break beneath the pressure. The trial was far from over, and he would find a way forward, even without his lawyer by his side. Clara Johnson sat in the crowded gallery, her heart thumping like a drum inside her chest. She had arrived just before the trial resumed, clutching a small satchel in her hand. Inside were the documents she had gathered over quiet nights and the study handwritten notes, printed emails, invoices with Mr. Ellington's signature, all neatly bound with a paper clip. She had never imagined herself in a courtroom, yet here she was, watching the man she served stand on trial with no lawyer. At his side, every time Marcus's eyes flicked toward the empty defense table, Clara felt a pang of pity and resolve. When the judge called the court back to order, Clara rose from her seat, her uniform rustling softly. Conversations hushed and heads turned toward her. She felt every gaze burn into her skin, but she forced herself to keep moving. She approached the long row of empty chairs where Marcus's lawyers should have been. A court officer stepped forward, hand raised. "You cannot speak," he said. Clara shook her head gently, voice firm, though trembling. "I must," she said. "I have evidence that will clear Marcus Ellington's name." The officer frowned, but stepped aside when Clara turned to address the judge. The judge looked at her over his glasses, eyebrows arching in surprise. "Who are you?" he asked, voice stern but curious. Clara straightened, lifted her chin and said, "I am Clara Johnson. I work for Mr. Ellington. I know the truth about these charges." The judge studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "You may speak, but be brief and to the point." Clara nodded, hugged her satchel to her chest, and moved toward the center of the courtroom, where she could be heard by everyone present. She opened her satchel and drew out the first set of papers handwritten, notes she had taken while organizing Marcus's private files. "Your Honor," she began, voice clear, "this case rests on allegations that Mr. Ellington approved certain company transactions that are false." She slid the notes onto the table in front of her and pointed to specific lines. These notes showed dates and times when Mr. Ellington was in meetings with other executives. He could not have signed those documents at the times the prosecution claims. The judge leaned forward, reading the notes, and Clara felt hope flicker. Next, she presented the invoices. "Here are invoices for charitable donations Mr. Ellington made personally," she said. "They match the amounts in question, but the charity accounts prove the funds went to schools, not into personal accounts." She tapped the printed pages, drawing the court's attention to the official stamps of the schools that had received the money. The prosecutor reached for the pages, but the judge waved him away. Clara watched the prosecutor's brow furrow as he read the documents. Clara then pulled out an email printout, slightly yellowed at the edges. "This email is the true message Mr. Ellington sent," she said, placing it next to the forged version the prosecution had shown earlier. "Notice the difference in wording and the date." She pointed to the timestamps, clear as day. Forged email was dated a week later than this authentic one. Forgery could not exist on the original date. The judge nodded slowly, and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Clara's calm explanation had made the flaw in the prosecution's case plain. Every time Clara spoke, her voice grew stronger. She described how she had organized Mr. Ellington's files, how she had taken notes during late-night work sessions, and how she had overheard key phone calls. She emphasized that her role had never been to judge or to interfere, only to support. Yet in this moment, supporting him meant speaking the truth. She laid out document after document, bank statements, internal memos, and witness statements from loyal employees, each one a brick in the foundation of Marcus's innocence. At one point, a prosecutor rose to object, voice high and tense. "Your Honor, this witness is not qualified," he said. The judge held up his hand. "I will decide what evidence is admissible," he said firmly. Turned to Clara. "Continue." Clara nodded, as though she had expected the interruption. She returned to her papers without hesitation, mindful of the judge's patience. She knew she had only a few minutes left before the judge lost his goodwill. She spoke in simple, honest terms, avoiding any fancy language or unnecessary detail. As Clara concluded, she folded her hands and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, I know the truth about Mr. Ellington because I have helped him for Years. I have no wish to harm anyone. I only want justice. She swept her gaze across the courtroom, meeting Marcus's eyes. His face was pale but hopeful. Hey. He mouthed a silent thank you, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She swallowed, forced a small smile, and stepped back to let the judge and attorneys review the documents. Silence fell. For what felt like a long moment, no one moved. Then the judge cleared his throat. These documents appear to undermine the prosecution's case, he said. He looked at the lead prosecutor. Are you prepared to respond? The prosecutor glanced at the papers, then at Clara, and shook his head. No, Your Honor, he admitted. We request time to review, but it seems we have overlooked key evidence. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. Very well. The court will take a short recess to consider these new materials. He rose and left the bench. Marcus hurried to Clara's side the moment the judge stepped away. He held her hands in his, voice thick with emotion. I can't believe you did this, he said softly. Clara's uniform fluttered as she stepped back, shaking her head. I did only what was right, she said. I believe in you. In that hallway outside the courtroom, reporters crowded near the doors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the maid who had turned defender. Clara and Marcus slipped past, stepping into a small antechamber where they could speak in private. Marcus took Clara's hands again. He looked at her as though he saw her for the first time, not just as a maid, but as a brave woman. I owe you everything, he said. Clara smiled gently. We owe it to the truth, she replied. She handed him a copy of the note she had taken, bound in a neat bundle. Keep this, she said. Shows everything. Marcus nodded, tears glistening. I will, he said, and I will never forget what you have done. They returned to the courtroom together side by side. Reporters' cameras clicked as they entered, but Clara held her head high. She felt proud, not just for herself, but for the principle she had stood for. Marcus resumed his place at the defense table, still with no lawyer, but now with Clara's, evidence fresh in the judge's mind. The trial would continue, but the tide had shifted. Clara had spoken for the truth, and in doing so, she had shown that courage and loyalty could come from the most unexpected person. As she took her seat in the gallery once more, Clara's heart settled. She had stepped forward when it mattered. Most stand she had not stopped until justice began to speak. Marcus Ellington sat back in his chair as the courtroom doors reopened. His heart pounded, but he felt steadier now that Clara had revealed the hidden evidence. The judge took his seat again and looked down at the thick stack of papers on his bench. He cleared his throat. We will continue, he said. Prosecution, proceed with your case in light of this new information. The lead prosecutor rose, smoothing his tie. He glanced at Clara, then at Marcus, and swallowed. He opened a folder and called his next witness, a former accountant from Marcus's company. The witness walked slowly to the stand, fidgeting with a pen. The prosecutor asked questions about the company's finances. He showed bank statements that had been part of the forged evidence. Marcus felt a surge of fear, but Clara squeezed his hand gently from the gallery. The accountant began to speak. His voice quivered. He described how he had prepared financial reports for Marcus Ellington, how he had personally overseen the charity donations, and how those donations matched Clara's paperwork exactly. The prosecutor tried to challenge his memory, but the accountant remained firm, said he had seen Marcus approve the checks and signed the genuine documents. His testimony reinforced Clara's evidence. Marcus realized his lawyer's absence mattered less now that people spoke the truth. When the prosecutor finished, he looked uneasy. He stood beside the witness and said, "No further questions." He sat down quickly, as though he feared more damage. Marcus could almost taste hope. The judge turned to Marcus's side. Defense, he said. Marcus rose slowly, glancing at Clara, who nodded. For the first time, he felt able to speak on his own behalf. Marcus cleared his throat. The courtroom fell silent. He spoke in a calm voice. Your Honor, members of the court, he began. I understand that this trial has become complicated. My former lawyer withdrew, but I did not lose faith in justice or in the truth. He paused, looking directly at the judge. I have lived my life trying to do right by my community. have supported schools, helped families in need, and invested in small businesses. He saw nods from a few jurors. He continued, "The charges against me came from a misunderstanding, and I believe a deliberate attempt to smear my name. Those forged emails and manipulated records do not reflect who I am." He motioned to Ward. "Clara in the gallery. This woman, my maid, has worked for me for 10 years. She has quietly witnessed my actions day after day. She knows what I have done with every dollar I donated, every check I wrote." Marcus pointed to the stack of genuine documents on the prosecutor's table. "These papers show the truth." As he spoke, Clara felt tears in her eyes. She sat very still, watching Marcus speak with honesty and strength. She thought back to the nights she had spent organizing files and jotting down details in her notebook. She felt proud that her careful work had given Marcus the chance to share his side. The judge listened with a steady expression. When Marcus finished, the prosecutor rose again, determined to make one final point. He asked Marcus about a meeting with a potential investor, a meeting that Marcus said in his signed calendar had taken place at the same time as one listed in the forged documents. The prosecutor handed Marcus a copy of the fake email, held it in his hands, and compared it to the genuine one Clara had shown earlier. He pointed out the difference in dates and wording, urging the judge to note the forgery once more. The judge frowned, reading both emails side by side. "It appears," he said slowly, "that the prosecution's evidence was based on a false document." He looked at the lawyer and asked, "Do you have any response?" The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it. He shook his head. "No, Your Honor," he said quietly. A hush settled over the courtroom. Nothing more would help the prosecution's case. Marcus knew his future depended on the judge's next words. He looked at Clara, whose face shone with quiet relief. Then he looked at the judge, who tapped the gavel. "I find that the prosecution has failed to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt," the judge said. "The charges against Marcus Ellington are hereby dismissed." The gavel sounded like thunder in the silent room. Marcus felt the weight of weeks lift from his shoulders. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath as the judge stepped down. The courtroom seemed to come alive. Porters rose with cameras poised. Jurors stood and filed out, some smiling at Marcus. Clara watched him, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. She stood and walked to his side as the judge left the bench. In the hallway, reporters shouted questions. Marcus raised a hand to hush them. He turned to Clara and spoke softly. "You saved me." Clara shook her head. "I only told the truth," she said. "You did what was right." He reached for her hand. He led her to a small room next to the courtroom where he could speak in private. He closed the door and turned to Clara. "I can never repay you," he said, voice thick with emotion. He held out his hand. "Let me at least offer you a better life, a promotion, more pay, I think." Clara smiled gently and shook her head. "I want only one thing," Clara said. "I want to keep working for you." She paused. "I want to stand by you when things get hard. That is enough." Marcus nodded, tears in his eyes. Later that afternoon, Marcus held a press conference in the courthouse foyer. Clara stood by, his side in her uniform, tall and proud. Flashbulbs popped and cameras clicked. Marcus spoke of his gratitude to Clara, calling her an example of loyalty and integrity. Clara felt uncomfortable in the bright lights, but she stood straight, meeting the cameras with steady eyes. After the conference, Marcus drove Clara home in his private car. He asked about her life, her family, her dreams. Clara spoke of her small apartment, her love for tending plants, and her wish to travel someday. Marcus listened intently. When they reached her street, he parked and turned to her. "Clara," he said, "from now on, you will have the freedom to pursue your dreams. I will give you the time and means to travel, learn, and grow." Clara's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus smiled. "You did more for me than any lawyer ever could," he said. "You defended more than my name. You defended my life's work and my honor." Clara nodded, feeling warmth fill her chest. As she stepped out of the car, she looked back at Marcus. He waved and she waved in return. She closed the door and walked toward her home under the soft glow of the street lamp. She carried with her a quiet pride and a sense that she had truly made a difference. That evening, Clara sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea. She looked at the papers on the counter notes she had taken, copies of genuine emails. The invoices marked charity. She smiled. She had done her duty with honesty and courage. She felt peaceful, knowing that the truth would guide her steps in whatever came next. In his mansion that night, Marcus placed Clara's documents in a glass case in his private study. He lit a lamp and read through the notes one more time, marveling. At Clara's careful work, he whispered a quiet thank you to the silent room. Then he sat in his chair, folded his hands, and thought of the woman who had no title but had changed his life forever. Clara Johnson woke the next morning to the soft light of dawn slipping through her curtains. Her small apartment felt calm after the storm of the trial. She cherished these quiet moments before the world stirred to life. Over the last few days, so much had changed. She had defended Marcus Ellington and helped save his reputation, yet her life still felt the same modest, peaceful, full of simple routines. And she liked it that way. She rose from bed and stretched, thinking of the letter Marcus had left on her kitchen table. It was an invitation to visit his home when she liked, to attend a special breakfast each Sunday. It also offered her the chance to take cooking classes, learn about flowers, or travel for a week to any place she wished. Clara smiled, folding the letter gently and tucking it in her apron pocket. She dressed quickly, pulled her hair into a neat bun, and set aside time to tend to her small group of potted plants. Each green leaf and tiny bloom seemed to nod in approval of the new chapter in her life. After watering her plants, Clara prepared her own breakfast. Simple oatmeal, with fresh berries she had bought at the market yesterday. She savored each spoonful, thinking of the changes ahead. She usually left for work early, but today she had time. She arranged her uniform on a chair, then paused to glance at a faded photograph on her mantel. In it, Clara stood beside her late mother, both of them smiling in a field of sunflowers. Clara remembered how her mother taught her to face life with kindness and courage. Those lessons guided her still. She felt her mother's presence in every gentle breeze. Later, Clara locked her door and headed to the Ellington residence. The drive was quiet, the city still waking. Sunday mornings had become special since the trial. She arrived at the grand gates and found Marcus waiting, greeted her with a warm smile, holding open the door for her. He wore casual clothes, today a soft sweater and jeans, and looked relaxed. Clara felt a flutter of pride that she had earned his respect and friendship. Inside, the dining room was bright with fresh flowers and sunlight. A long table held plates of fluffy pancakes, crisp fruit, and freshly brewed coffee. Marcus stood behind a small podium at one end, but he stepped aside when Clara entered. "Good morning, Clara," he said. "Thank you for joining me." Clara nodded and walked down the table, greeting the other guest friends of Marcus. Local educators and the headmaster of Clara's old school. They all clapped softly when she took her seat. Clara felt a warmth blossom in her chest. They ate and talked about simple things, spring flowers, neighborhood events, and plans for community gardens. Clara listened and joined in with gentle laughter. Marcus watched her with a fond look, and she realized how much her life had grown richer since she had spoken out. How she had not only saved Marcus's name, it built new connections and discovered her own strength. After breakfast, Marcus walked Clara to the kitchen. "I have a gift for you," he said, handing her a small wicker basket. Inside lay gardening tools, pruning shears, a trowel, and packets of flower seeds. "You mentioned you love plants," he said. "I thought these might help you grow even more." Clara's eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus," she said softly. "This means so much." He nodded. "You deserve bright things in your life, Clara." That afternoon, Clara returned home and spent hours planting seeds in small pots. She labeled each one carefully: marigolds, lilies, and daisies. She placed them by the window, imagining their blooms in a few weeks. While she worked, the memory of the trial returned, and with it, a sense of quiet pride. She thought of the judge's nod, the hushed courtroom, and the moment Marcus called her a hero. She had found her voice when it mattered most, and that confidence now guided her gentle hands. As days passed, Clara's routine shifted. Each Monday she met with a cooking instructor in Marcus's kitchen, learning new techniques and recipes. On Tuesdays, she studied floral design, arranging blossoms like an artist. Wednesdays were for gardening workshops, where she met neighbors and shared tips. Thursdays and Fridays, she returned to her regular cleaning and organizing tasks, but with a lighter heart, she knew she was valued not just as a maid, but as a friend and partner in kindness. One morning, Marcus asked Clara to accompany him to a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new community center he had funded. Clara hesitated. She still saw herself as a behind-the-scenes person, but Marcus insisted. "You belong here," he said. At the ceremony, Clara stood beside Marcus as he thanked the crowd. When she stepped to the microphone, people clapped. When they heard her name, Clara felt a wave of emotion. She spoke briefly about the power of community and the importance of standing up for truth. Her words were simple, honest, and touched many hearts. From that day, Clara received letters of thanks from local families and attendees. She placed them in a scrapbook she kept on her coffee table. Months later, Clara found herself packing a suitcase for a trip to a quiet countryside town. Marcus had arranged for her to stay in a charming cottage by a lake. She would spend 5 days exploring gardens and writing in her journal. Clara felt excitement and a tremble of nerves. She had never traveled alone before, but she thought of her mother's sunflowers and of the courage she had shown in the courtroom. She smiled and closed her suitcase, determined to make the most of this gift. When Clara arrived at the cottage, she discovered a basket of fresh bread and cheese on the kitchen table with a note from Marcus. "Enjoy these days. You deserve peace and joy." Clara unpacked slowly, placing her journal by the bed and watering the cottage plants. She opened her journal and wrote a simple sentence. "Today, I begin a new chapter." She spent her days strolling by the lake, sketching flowers and writing down her thoughts. She felt the calm of nature fill her soul. On the last day, a nearby gardener invited her to help plant lilies in a small community garden. Clara joined eagerly, using her new tools and skills. When they finished, the gardener hugged her. "Thank you," he said. "Your touch made these gardens grow." When Clara returned home, she brought back seeds and stories to share. She found Marcus in his study, reading by the lamp. She handed him a small wooden box filled with seeds she had collected, special lilies from the countryside. "For the trees in your yard," she said. Marcus smiled and took her hand. "Your adventures make this world brighter," he said. Life continued, full of small moments and gentle routines. Clara still polished silver and arranged flowers in the Ellington home. But she also created her own garden on the terrace, filled with the lilies and daisies she had planted. Each Sunday breakfast, she tasted new recipes she had learned. Each week, she added to her scrapbook of thank you letters. She had grown in confidence, skill, and joy. One evening, Marcus invited Clara to his garden under a sky full of stars. He had arranged lanterns among the flower beds and set out chairs near a fountain. Clara followed the stone path, her heart light. Marcus handed her a notebook one he had filled with letters of appreciation sent by the community, stories of lives changed by his charity work. "These are your stories too," he said. "You helped me create them." Clara opened the notebook and read tears of gratitude from teachers, neighbors, and even students. She closed the book gently and looked at Marcus. "I could never have imagined such a life," she said. "Thank you for believing in me." He took her hand and said, "No, Clara, you believed in me." Under the glow of lanterns and the soft sound of water, Clara realized that loyalty and truth had led her here. She thought of that moment in the courtroom when she had taken a stand, voice strong and heart steady. She had defended a man, but she had also discovered her own power to change lives. She looked at Marcus, her friend and friend of the community, and felt grateful for their bond. As the night deepened, Clara and Marcus sat by the fountain, sharing stories of dreams and plans. The garden around them thrived, like their friendship, rooted in kindness, watered with trust, and blooming in bright colors. Clara knew that whatever tomorrow held, she would meet it with the same courage she had shown before. She had defended. A billionaire in court, but she had also defended her own spirit. And now, as she gazed at the lantern-lit blossoms, she felt that her life was as beautiful and unexpected as the flowers around her.